What's up, everybody? It's KBR Sports, the best sports talk show, your 24-hour day. I'm your host, Brendan Abbin. Coming to you solo today for it's Wednesday, so it's Nigel's normal day when he's not going to be in for the show today. So I'm coming to you by myself today. Remember, you all can follow and subscribe to the KBR Sports Podcast by going on Rabble TV, Spreaker, YouTube, iTunes, and SoundCloud. Also, don't forget you can follow the KBR Sports Twitter page at KBR_sports with the live links and show topics are tweeted prior to every single show. Also, don't forget you can call in at 571-991-0566 in order to give all your thoughts and opinions on any KBR Sports show topic that may be getting discussed or that you want to hear discussed on tonight's show, or on future shows. Also, remember everybody to send your thoughts and prayers to those being affected by Hurricane Irma. We just got through everything with Hurricane Harvey, and then it seems like Irma just comes right up to follow up and just bring its own share of devastation with it. Right now, it's being said it's categorized as a Category 5 hurricane. So definitely make sure you send your well wishes and prayers out to those that are being affected in the islands and the Caribbean. Those are going to be affected by Florida, since that appears where it will hit first. So make sure you send your well wishes out to all those that are going to be affected by Hurricane Irma and all those that have been affected. And make sure, just help, if you can even just send a little bit just to donate out to help those people, whether it's helping the people of Hurricane Harvey, helping the people of Hurricane Irma. Remember, you all can go if you want to help with Hurricane Harvey, you can go to the Red Cross and donate through there, as well as with Hurricane Irma. JJ Watt has started his own fund, which has raised up to nearly $20 million in donations and just giving from other people. So remember, you guys can go through those different links and try and give help. And just if you just any kind of way you can give help, whether it's applying your time and your own personal efforts, and by giving physical help or just by donating money. Remember, you guys should always give a helping hand, because it always what goes around comes around. And a lot of times we don't really think that, oh, this won't happen to me, this won't blah blah. Like, you shouldn't have to. It shouldn't have to happen to you before you're willing to help somebody else out. Just have it in your heart to just go out and help those people that are being affected by the hurricane, whether it's donating money or donating your time and efforts. Just remember to help them out. All right, y'all. So let me give the rundown of today's show. So I'm going to be talking about, obviously, the first topic I'm going to be starting out with is fantasy football, and a lot of people are starting off their fantasy football drafts, whether they've happened already or whether they're set to kick off tonight or tomorrow night. I'm going to be talking about some fantasy football and some updates in terms of fantasy football, and also going to be talking about Isaiah Thomas's farewell to Boston and the emotional letter he penned through the Players Tribune, and just what I think about Isaiah Thomas's thoughts and upon leaving. Then NFL over-unders, just giving my thoughts on the over-under for the season, for the Week 1 matchups, and those kind of things, the betting lines for that. So touch on some of that, and also a certain team in the MLB or long-term storied rivals in the MLB apparently cheating going on, or cheating reported between both teams. So I'll touch on some of that as well, just to get through all that. But all right, like I said, to kick off everything, I'm going to start off with talking about the fantasy football, because I mean, when you think about it, when you have there's always a certain time in the year when everybody always comes together, and you start to see people that don't even know each other can come together. They can all come together to enjoy each other's, not in terms of not even company, because you can enjoy this game in different locations via virtual playing and other such things. But it's one of those pastimes that a lot of people can enjoy by coming together to play in fantasy football. A lot of things don't bring people together like this. Like, I've met a lot of people through playing in fantasy football leagues. So when you partake in fantasy football, you develop healthy competition with those that you're playing against, and a sense of camaraderie with those that you're playing against, because at times you might need the help of somebody in your league, because you might have a player that you really want to trade for, and sometimes the relationship you have with those people in that league might help you land a certain player, or sometimes a lot of people say they don't do this. So some people, I don't know how they collude in some instances on, okay, I got the 7th pick, don't take so and so because you're about to pick right before me, and I really want so and so, and then the other person's like, oh yeah, don't worry, I won't take them. I'll let you have them. I'm just gonna take so and so, or they'll agree to have them trade them somebody else later on, as a repayment for them not taking that exact player they wanted. So I think fantasy football is definitely it's one of those things that with coming in time with the NFL season, that's one part of the reason why everybody gets excited for the NFL season. Everybody gets excited because you have that thing that you can put invested time and interest in. Because I think when it comes to these games, half the time everybody gets stuck into a situation where you're so into your fantasy football league that like some people check it like daily, some people check it like hourly, some people check it weekly. Some people are so bad at fantasy football that they don't check it like on a routine weekly basis or on a every other day basis. So then half their team can be on a bye week and they wouldn't even know, or on injured reserve and they wouldn't even know it. So then they end up playing a game in which their opponent is set up for victory essentially. So I definitely think that fantasy football is one of the best activities and things that brings people together, because anybody can play in it, anybody can be involved in it. Even though somebody might not know what they're doing, you can still assemble an okay team by just letting auto draft select for you for some people. So I think that fantasy football is definitely something that is going to draw a lot of discussion this season, especially on this podcast, because I partake in fantasy football. Nigel in particular, he partakes in it somewhat, but I don't know if he joined the league this season. But I'm actually going to be in 3 leagues this season, so I have a lot of vested interest in this fantasy football season. All right, so let's get everything kicked off with talking about the different, just the different drafts and how you should approach your fantasy football season. So we have the main marquee formats for the fantasy football. They're going to be the standard and the PPR, points per reception format. And so I'm going to kind of address both means and come at it from both angles. I'm not going to go through like a whole draft, but essentially just go over who the most, because a lot of times people don't realize there's a difference between when you're playing for PPR and you're playing for just for standard. When you're getting points off per reception as well, at that point now you're starting to want to go into looking at players that get targeted a lot, that have a lot of receptions, that have a high catch rate. And coupling with that high catch rate, they get a lot of receptions with that. So then you get a lot of points. Obviously, you're going to turn into most likely going to turn into a lot of production if they're getting a lot of receptions. So that's when you have guys like, I think at the top of both drafts, if you have standard or PPR, at the top of both drafts is going to be David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell. Okay, so both guys, David Johnson has his bye week in week 8. Le'Veon Bell has his bye week in week 9. So when you look at both guys, they're both dual backs. You know what I mean? Like they're running backs, so they get running production, they get rushing touchdowns and all that. But they're also very viable receivers. Excuse me. They're heavily used in their team's offenses. And I think last season when Le'Veon Bell was suspended, it affected the Steelers' offense to such a degree that when he came back, they reeled off a 9 games in a 9-game winning streak. So when you look at it from that perspective, you can only sit there and think, okay, well, when you have two guys that the teams depend on them so much, you can't help but essentially have to take one or the other as your number 1 or the 2 pick, with the number 1 or 2 pick. I've seen some people in some leagues get really, really, crafty here, because I've seen some people, they've gone outside the purview of normally taking a running back. Because normally people, when you're in your earlier rounds or early draft rounds, you're taking running backs and wide receivers. Some people I've seen go and elect to take, the main guy that I've seen elected to be taken this early is Aaron Rodgers. And it's only because he had such an amazing fantasy football year last season, and he was so productive that he just, if you had him on your team, you were banking over 20 points in fantasy like every week. Like it was just that absurd how well Aaron Rodgers played last season. So, but when it comes to the running backs, I think me personally, when it comes to these two running backs, I think the Cardinals and David Johnson is a better bet to take if you have the first overall pick. I definitely would want to take David Johnson, because David Johnson for me is a guy that he's coming from a Cardinals team that last season they didn't have their best season, and it's a team that has less weapons. Of course, you got Larry Fitzgerald, but he's an aged Larry Fitzgerald, and you have a guy like Josh Brown, and you have an aging Carson Palmer. So what do you do when you have aging assets, especially at the quarterback position? You want to run the football more and take more pressure off that quarterback and get him hit less. So David Johnson, I definitely see being the guy to will receive a lot of production. And a lot of times when Carson Palmer was getting rushed, especially now when you look into the division, you got the Rams, their pass rush, you got the Seahawks and their pass rush. The 49ers got an okay pass rush, but you look at those two teams that I said formerly, and when you look at that, you're going to be resulting in a lot of checkdowns, a lot of screens to slow down the pass rush and to kind of steady it out, and that's going to be a lot of production for David Johnson. So I definitely see David Johnson being worth the number 1 overall pick. Now, in terms of the wide receiver I would take off the board, I think in both drafts I would have to say Antonio Brown. I mean, the dude is a fantasy football freak, and it's without a doubt that he's Ben Roethlisberger's favorite target. Okay, so last year when you look at it, Antonio Brown had 106 receptions, second only to Larry Fitzgerald. 1,284 yards, 12 touchdowns. Like you really think about it, Antonio Brown is such especially in points. He should be the top receiver even in a points per reception league because he had 154 targets. 154 targets, and his catch rate was 68.8%. See, one of the great things about Antonio Brown is that he gets targeted a lot because he doesn't always need the deep bomb and the big deep passes to be productive. A lot of Antonio Brown's production comes in catches that he turns into bigger gains. It turns into a lot of yards after the catch kind of production. So you can't help but acknowledge how great of a fantasy threat he can be. Now, when you look at other guys that got targeted more than Antonio Brown last year, you got guys like Mike Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., Julian Edelman, and T.Y. Hilton. But here's the thing, though. When you look at these other guys, they didn't have the only other guy that had as good a season as Antonio Brown as the other guys I said was Mike Evans, who had 1,321 yards and 12 touchdowns. And he was targeted 173 times, but he had a 55% catch rate. And so that resulted in him having 96 receptions. Only problem with that is that when you're a guy that gets so heavily targeted by Jameis Winston that obviously his target's going to go down this season because he has Deshaun Jackson. But a lot of the issues that a lot of times with when you have a guy like Mike Evans is that he's more of a big guy receiver. So he is more physical, but he doesn't get as many of the easy catches because he's not lining up in the slot like Antonio Brown or Odell Beckham Jr. is. And a lot of times you got to look at a person's offense and see how much of their offense is reliant on that wide receiver. If the offense is so heavily reliant on that wide receiver, it makes it more easier for the defense to key in on that wide receiver. A la Odell Beckham Jr. Odell Beckham Jr. had more receiving yards than Antonio Brown, yes. But in terms of receiving touchdowns, Antonio Brown beats him out by 2. So, and then Odell Beckham Jr., his catch rate was a lot lower than Antonio Brown's, with Odell Beckham Jr.'s being at 59.8% and Antonio Brown's being at 68.8%. And now with Antonio Brown being surrounded by Martavis Bryant, you're bringing him back. You got Le'Veon Bell back. Like, it's just so many weapons that the Steelers will have. Now you could use that as a counter argument to say that could take some targets away from Antonio Brown. But Ben Roethlisberger has shown, regardless of who's there, he's always going to get Antonio Brown his touches. Every single season since Antonio Brown has burst onto the scene, he's always gotten Antonio Brown his touches. So if you have Antonio Brown in fantasy, I would definitely be happy if I'm an Antonio Brown person and I have him listed on my team. Okay, so now let's go to the standpoint of quarterbacks. I obviously touched on quarterbacks earlier. I'm definitely taking Aaron Rodgers first in any league if I have a pick for a quarterback. Aaron Rodgers last season, he threw 40 touchdowns to like 7 interceptions. I mean, he had a ridiculous season. And now you're giving him Jordy Nelson back for the whole year. You're giving him Martellus Bennett. Devontae Adams is coming back for a repeat for another year. Like, Aaron Rodgers will only get better. So you're looking at it and you're like, okay, so I have to take all that into account. That's why a lot of people are taking him so early, even though you normally tend to wait for quarterbacks until like the 3rd, 4th round. So I definitely understand why Aaron Rodgers will be taken this early. A lot of people took Cam Newton last season early in fantasy football because he combined for 45 touchdowns 2 years ago. So you only assumed that he was a running, throwing quarterback. So you thought he would put up the same kind of fantasy production, but not the same. Definitely Aaron Rodgers is my first quarterback to go off the board. Now, in terms of ranking the different positions, running backs, I say my top 5 running backs: David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, LaShawn McCoy. And then now after those top 3, because those are the guys that are going to get a lot of the most touches. Now this is where the situation starts to get a little tricky. You got to look at each team's situation. Now, I wouldn't be too against Melvin Gordon possibly being my next running back, especially in a PPR league, because Melvin Gordon, he's a guy that had a good season last year with Phillip Rivers, and you're gonna bank on the fact that because some of Phillip Rivers' receivers are gonna be hurt, he's gonna rely on Melvin Gordon a lot more. Melvin Gordon's gonna get a lot more touches, so I definitely could see Melvin Gordon getting some touches after that point. Then you look at a guy like Devontae Freeman. He does share the backfield with Tevin Coleman, so it does make you a little bit weary of that. But I would definitely say I would level out to maybe Devontae Freeman and DeMarco Murray. Those are 2 guys I would definitely have on my fantasy radar, because those the Titans, in terms of how the Titans use DeMarco Murray, he's their primary back. He gets a lot of the heavy carries, he gets a lot of the bulk of the carries, in conjunction with Derrick Henry, who gives him a breather every now and then. But DeMarco Murray's still the every down back, still the most of the times the every down back. Now, you look at it from the standpoint of Devontae Freeman. I mean, he plays for the Falcons. They're a high-octane offense. They were the number 1 offense in the league last year, and Devontae had a great season last year. So I definitely would say those would be my top 5 running backs. In terms of wide receivers, Antonio Brown would be my first. Now, Odell Beckham Jr., his health kind of, I'll touch on it. I'll give him an update in terms of his health. But if you're talking about reception and in terms of being targeted, Odell Beckham Jr. definitely was the guy that you would want to have up there, because he definitely gets his targets and everything like that, and it makes him more of a more reliable target than a Julio Jones in terms of how often he will produce. So I think I would take Odell Beckham Jr. second, then Julio Jones third. I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh man, I don't know, like, you might think Julio Jones is the better player. Yes, that's perfectly well and fine, but in terms of who gets targeted more, Odell Beckham Jr. accounts for almost 25% of the Giants' offense. It's ridiculous. So when you look at it, I think Odell Beckham Jr. is definitely the safer pick to be the guy that produces week in and week out. So now after that, I would look at a guy like Jordy Nelson, who's going to probably have another good season under Aaron Rodgers. He was coming off an injury last season. He had a great year last year. So I would definitely put Jordy Nelson up there in terms of my 4th receiver, and then probably 5th I would have AJ Green. Excuse me. Because when you look at it, Jordy Nelson last season caught 14 touchdowns, 1,257 receiving yards. Like, him and Aaron Rodgers were a dangerous duo last season, so I definitely would love to pair those guys up on my fantasy team. Now, quarterbacks, I would have to go. I gotta get to the updates real fast. But in terms of quarterbacks, I would go Aaron Rodgers. I would go Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and say it becomes quarterbacks. It becomes a lot more tricky, because especially when you have higher aged quarterbacks like a Tom Brady, like a Drew Brees, those ilk, it becomes a lot more difficult to rate these guys. So I think at that point I would consider Kirk Cousins after that, because Kirk Cousins is the guy that does throw a lot for high yardage, and he does throw a good amount of touchdowns. After that, I bank my money on Derek Carr. And the only reason why I would take Kirk Cousins over Derek Carr is just because of the strength of defenses in the divisions. Kirk Cousins faces a weaker defense in his division than Derek Carr does. Derek Carr's division is home to the Chiefs and the Denver Broncos defense. So he plays them. Those teams combined total of 4 times in the year. So that's the one thing that hurts me in terms of Derek Carr and how I would judge him. And he also play. I think that division is playing the NFC West this year. So that subject him to playing the Seattle Seahawks defense, the Arizona Cardinals defense, and the Los Angeles Rams defense. So that's definitely something that I would keep my eye out for, and I'd be wary of. Okay, in terms of Week 1 updates, Odell Beckham Jr. he participated in warm-ups today, so that's definitely a good sign in terms of if you're expecting him to play on the field. Now they could sit him just because of the fact that they don't want him to totally re-aggravate the ankle injury, but right now it's looking like he could play on Sunday. Then you have Ezekiel Elliott, who will play in the first game against the Giants, because his restraining order is still being worked out, and because as a result of that, he cannot be served his suspension yet. So Ezekiel Elliott will play. Now, a reminder to all those: the Miami Dolphins and Tampa Bay Buccaneers game has been canceled and will be replayed in Week 11 when both teams have a bye week. So as a result of that, this week, Jay Ajayi is not available, Jarvis Landry is not available, Jameis Winston's not available, Deshaun Jackson's not available, Mike Evans is not available. A lot of guys taken off the board as a result of this game cancellation. So just making sure everybody makes sure they adjust their lineups, because you don't want to go into a situation where you think these guys are going to be available and you're looking forward to it week 1, and then you don't make the necessary adjustments to your roster. Also, looking at different fantasy football matchups, you got everybody who has different sleeper picks you might want to pick up. I know this from personal experience. You might want to look into picking up Sammy Watkins, who's going up against the Colts defense this weekend for the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams offense is being engineered by former offensive coordinator of the Washington, Sean McVay. And Sean McVay is the same guy that oversaw the last 2 seasons Kirk Cousins has had, where he's thrown for over 4,000 yards in both seasons, over 25 touchdowns. So I definitely would look into possibly picking up Jared Goff or picking up Sammy Watkins, because he will most likely eat up second-year corners on the Colts defense. Then another fantasy matchup that might not be favorable to many is Des Bryant going up against Janoris Jenkins. I would definitely be weary of that one. I'm not sure if I want to go into that one. I'm not sure if because Janoris Jenkins has been a Badger in that division, especially in his first season with the Giants, and that defense is only looking better this season. So I don't know if I would particularly bet my money on Des Bryant going up against that stout defense. Then you also have to be wary of Michael Thomas going up against the Minnesota Vikings defense with Xavier Rhodes. Xavier Rhodes is known as a dog corner. He likes to get up on under guys, and Michael Thomas and Saints offense has kind of taken a dip in some regards. So I would be wary of Michael Thomas against the Xavier Rhodes and the Minnesota Vikings defense. So that's pretty much my wrap up of the fantasy football week 1 updates. Make sure also, you guys can also pick up, there's also sleepers. If I have more time, I'll touch on more of them, but I got to get to other topics. So don't forget, you can also pick up guys like Jared Goff, other sleeper quarterbacks. Eli Manning might be a sleeper quarterback going up against the Cowboys defense. Other guys Andy Dalton could be a sleeper quarterback that you could possibly pick up late in your draft. So I would definitely look into all those in the event that your quarterback gets hurt. So those are definitely a lot of options and avenues that people can look into when needing to build their fantasy football teams. All right, y'all, let's get to our next topic. When we come back from the break, going to be talking about Isaiah Thomas's letter that he penned for the Boston Celtics and just for the league in general. Stay tuned to find out what he had to say and my thoughts on his letter. And KBR Sports, the best sports talk show 24-hour day.